a 4-star general, a luxury hotel, a receptionist who decided who he was before he said a word. He gave his name. She said the reservation wasn't there. It had always been there. Then he placed his ID on the desk. 4 stars, United States Army, General Marcus Webb. The lobby went very quiet. It was a Thursday afternoon in November, the kind of day where the city moves quietly, and nobody expects anything unusual to interrupt the rhythm of it. And Marcus Webb had been traveling for 11 hours by the time the car pulled up in front of the Aldridge, one of the oldest luxury hotels in the city. He was 63 years old, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, the kind of man whose presence fills a room without him doing anything to make it happen. Dressed simply in an olive gray jacket and dark trousers, carrying a single black travel bag worn at the corners from 30 years of deployments, the same bag he had carried to every corner of the world. He walked through the front entrance and into the lobby, marble floors, a chandelier filling the ceiling with warm light, and approached the reception desk the way a man approaches things when he has learned patience in places where impatience costs far more than time. He had stayed here twice before, both times for military conferences, both times in a suite on the 14th floor that the Department of Defense had reserved under his name, and he had every reason to expect this visit would begin the same way. The receptionist was young, dressed in the hotel's standard black uniform, and she looked up at him with an expression that had already made a decision before he said a word. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quieter kind of judgment that wears the face of professionalism while meaning something else entirely. He told her he had a reservation and gave his name, Marcus Webb, and she looked at her screen and told him she did not see anything under that name, her voice carrying the smooth courtesy that hotels train their staff to maintain, regardless of what they actually mean. He told her to check again, and she looked at the screen with the particular slowness of someone who has already decided the answer and is simply performing the search, then suggested he might have the wrong hotel. He looked at her the way he had looked at junior officers who had made an error and were about to be given the opportunity to correct it, and asked her to check under the Department of Defense booking reference. She typed something and her expression shifted slightly, just enough to show that something on the screen had not matched what she expected. And he watched the small recalibration that happens when a person's assumption meets a fact that does not support it. The reservation was there, it had always been there, booked under his name and his rank and the department's account, the same way it had been booked both times before, and she confirmed it without apology and shifted into the check-in process as though the previous exchange had not happened. He placed his identification on the desk, not because she asked for it, but because he had learned long ago that documentation closes conversations that words leave open. And her hands slowed on the keyboard, and she looked up at him, and then back at the card, and something in her face went very still. The card identified him clearly: his name, his rank, his branch, the 4 stars that represented 40 years of service and a career that most people in that lobby would never fully understand. General Marcus Webb, United States Army. And the lobby continued its quiet Thursday afternoon as though nothing significant was happening at its reception desk. She finished the check-in without speaking much, handed him his room keys, told him his suite was on the 14th floor, her voice noticeably lower than it had been before, and he picked up his bag and thanked her and walked toward the elevator without looking back. The suite was the same one he had stayed in before, large windows looking out over the city, a desk near the window, and he set his bag on the luggage stand and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, just letting the stillness settle after 11 hours of travel and a day that had started at 6 in the morning. He had flown in from Washington, briefing at 6 a.m., 2 connecting flights, nothing to eat since a sandwich at the airport in Dallas. None of that was unusual. He had done versions of that day hundreds of times. It was just the ordinary texture of a life spent in service. What was slightly less ordinary was the way the afternoon had started at the reception desk, though familiar was probably the more accurate word. Familiar in the way that certain experiences become familiar, when they happen often enough that you learn to recognize them on arrival before they have fully announced themselves. The woman at the desk had seen a large, older black man with a worn travel bag and had made a series of calculations that had nothing to do with the reservation clearly visible on her screen, and he understood that with the particular clarity of someone who has encountered that kind of calculation many times before. He ordered room service and sat at the desk near the window and looked out at the city, not with anger, not with the desire to do anything about it, just with the particular attention he gave to things that told him something true about the distance between where the country was and where it said it was going. The next morning, he addressed a joint services conference at the convention center, 2 blocks from the hotel. 400 officers from 6 branches in one room, arriving at 7:15, meeting senior officers in the green room over coffee, and taking the stage at 9 o'clock in front of a room that went completely quiet the moment he appeared. He spoke for 40 minutes without notes, talking about service and what it asks of a person and what it gives back, and the gap between those two things, and the obligation created by the people who do not make it back, and why obligation is different from duty, and why that difference matters more than most people in positions of authority ever fully reckon with. The room was quiet the whole time, the particular quiet of people who are not just listening but recognizing something in their own experience. And when he finished, there was a moment before the applause that he had learned to receive without filling it. He was back at the hotel by noon, had lunch on the 2nd floor, spent the afternoon on calls with Washington that ran longer than scheduled, and by 4 o'clock was sitting at the window again watching the city the way he watched most things, without expectation and without agenda. That evening, the hotel manager appeared at his suite door, apologetic and careful, having been informed during the day about the previous afternoon's exchange. A small, neat man in his 50s who chose his words with the precision of someone who understood that the wrong ones would make things considerably worse than they already were. He apologized, and Webb said it was fine and meant it in the specific way that a person means something is fine when they are indicating that the conversation can end, and the manager said the staff member had been spoken to, and Webb nodded and the suite was quiet again. He did not know what being spoken to meant in that hotel's particular language, and was not especially interested in finding out. What mattered, if anything would change at all, was the next person who walked through that lobby with a worn bag and a reservation that was absolutely there on the screen. He hoped it would change something for that person, understood it might not, and accepted the uncertainty the way he accepted most uncertainties, as a condition of the work rather than an argument against doing it. The following morning he checked out at 6:30. A different receptionist handled it quickly and professionally, and he collected his bag and walked through the lobby and out into the early morning city, where the light was just beginning to come in over the buildings. His car was waiting, and he got into the back seat and looked out the window as the hotel disappeared behind them. A flight at 8:40, a meeting in Washington at 2, dinner that evening with the Secretary of Defense that had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. He thought about the conference and the speech and the room full of officers who had sat in complete silence while he talked about obligation, and about how the gap between what service asks and what it gives back looks entirely different depending on where you are standing when you measure it. At the airport, nobody looked at him twice. He was just a large older man in an olive jacket with a worn travel bag, waiting for a flight the way everyone in an airport is waiting for something. And the flight boarded on time, and the city fell away beneath him, and he opened his notes and did not think about the hotel again. Somewhere below, in a lobby with marble floors and warm chandelier light, the desk was being staffed by someone new, and on a screen that had shown the reservation clearly the whole time, the name Marcus Webb still sat exactly where it had always been, waiting for someone to look at it without deciding first what they expected to find. Subscribe to Dark Chapters US, because there are many more chapters left to uncover, and none of them are easy to read.